Hey guys, tonight we're dimming the lights and stepping back into a world of exquisite beauty, rigid honor, and often profound, unacknowledged misery. We're delving into what sucked about being a samurai's wife and more. You might think of samurai wives as figures of quiet grace, living in serene gardens, perhaps composing poetry under cherry blossoms. And while there was certainly beauty in their world, beneath that elegant surface lay a reality of relentless fear, demanding duties, and emotional sacrifice that would shatter most modern sensibilities. This wasn't just a life, it was a constant, high-stakes test of endurance, where failure often meant not just personal ruin, but the ruin of your entire family's honor and future. You'd probably think twice about romanticizing ancient nobility if you truly understood the daily dread a samurai's wife carried. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where in the world are you tuning in from tonight? What time is it for you? Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together, into the terrifying realities of ancient domestic life. Our first deep dive takes us right into the heart of a samurai wife's most pervasive companion, a life of constant fear. Imagine yourself as a young woman, perhaps married into a powerful samurai clan in medieval Japan, living in a fortified castle town like Kanazawa. But for our story, let's imagine you're a woman married to a prominent military officer during the American Civil War, perhaps residing near a volatile border state like Missouri or Kansas. Your husband is often away, fighting, and the news from the front is always grim. Every distant drumbeat, every rumor carried by a passing horseman, every hushed conversation among your servants sends a jolt of anxiety through you. You are constantly aware that your entire world could collapse at any moment, not just through enemy action, but from betrayal from within, or the shifting tides of political favor. You might worry about a layoff at work or a bill coming due, but at least your biggest concern isn't whether your husband will return from battle alive, or if your entire family will be ordered to commit ritual suicide due to a sudden change in allegiance. The most disturbing fact about this constant fear was its multi-layered existential nature, extending far beyond the battlefield. It wasn't just the fear of your husband dying in battle, though that was certainly paramount. It was also the pervasive dread of political intrigue and betrayal within the clan itself. Samurai society was a complex web of alliances, rivalries, and shifting loyalties. A slight misstep by your husband, a rumor whispered in the ear of a powerful lord, or a sudden change in political winds could mean disgrace, banishment, or even a command to commit seppuku ritual suicide for your husband, and by extension, for you and your children. Imagine living in a world where your family's honor and existence hung by the thinnest thread, constantly vulnerable to hidden enemies within your own social circle. It's like being a character in a never-ending, high-stakes political thriller. But the consequences are always fatal and deeply personal. The constant threat of war and invasion was a tangible, ever-present menace. While men went to battle, women remained behind, often in castles or fortified homes that were themselves targets. They faced the possibility of siege, starvation, or a brutal assault by enemy forces. Imagine listening to the distant sounds of battle, knowing that if your husband's side loses, your home could be overrun, your family slaughtered, and your own fate could be captivity, rape, or death, all for a conflict you had no part in instigating. This wasn't abstract. It was the chilling reality that could arrive at your doorstep at any moment. A common historical fact. During Japan's Sengoku Warring States period, mid-15th to early 17th centuries, samurai wives and women often lived in fortified castles that were directly involved in sieges. When a castle was about to fall, women were sometimes expected to commit suicide jigai to preserve their honor and avoid capture. A stark testament to the ultimate horror they faced in times of war. Imagine the weight of knowing that defeat meant not just loss, but a preordained brutal end to your life by your own hand. One particularly grim, Lesser known detail about this constant fear involves the psychological burden of knowing that your young children, especially male heirs, could be used as political pawns or hostages. A samurai wife's primary duty was to bear and raise children, particularly sons, who would inherit their father's status and duties. However, these children were also immensely valuable assets in the brutal game of feudal politics. They could be sent away as hostages to ensure an alliance, married off to solidify a pact, or, in times of extreme conflict, even executed by a victorious enemy to eliminate a rival lineage. Imagine raising your beloved son, knowing that he is not truly yours, but a piece in a dangerous political game, and that at any moment he could be taken from you, used, or even killed, for reasons entirely beyond your control. This added a layer of profound, agonizing helplessness to a mother's love. It's like preparing your child for college. But the college is a hostage exchange program. The fear of public disgrace and loss of honor was another deeply ingrained anxiety. Samurai society placed an almost unimaginable emphasis on honor, not just for the individual, but for the entire family. A husband's failure, a wife's indiscretion, real or perceived, or a child's perceived weakness could bring shame upon the entire household, leading to social ostracism, loss of lands, or even worse fates. Imagine living under constant scrutiny. Every action, every word, every gesture weighed against an impossibly high standard of decorum and loyalty, knowing that a single mistake could bring ruin upon everyone you love, forcing you to live a life of perfect, suffocating control. Furthermore, the lack of personal agency and control over one's own fate fueled a pervasive sense of helplessness. A samurai wife's life was largely dictated by the men around her. Her father, her husband's lord. She had little say in her marriage, her daily duties, or the major political decisions that directly impacted her life. This meant she was often a passive observer in her own tragedy, unable to influence the events that brought fear and destruction to her doorstep. Imagine knowing your life is on a ship caught in a storm, but you're not allowed to touch the rudder. Only watch and pray. The psychological toll of living with such constant, existential fear was immense. It fostered a deep-seated anxiety, a pervasive sense of insecurity, and a profound emotional guardedness. Joy was always tempered by the awareness of impending doom, and peace was a fleeting illusion. This wasn't just physical danger, it was the quiet, gnawing dread of unpredictability, a constant battle against a world where safety was a myth and tragedy was a recurring visitor. Their desperate coping mechanisms included stoicism and emotional discipline, training themselves from a young age to suppress outward displays of fear or grief, believing that showing weakness endangered their family's honor, intense prayer and rituals, turning to Buddhist and Shinto deities for protection, often performing elaborate ceremonies or making offerings for their husband's safety, cultivating strategic alliances, using their social connections and influence to gather intelligence, build goodwill, and subtly advance their family's political standing, preparing for the worst training in self-defense, managing household defenses, and preparing for the possibility of siege or jigai, demonstrating immense courage in the face of despair, focus on duty channeling fear and anxiety into meticulous performance of their domestic and social duties, finding a sense of purpose and control in the things they could manage. The misery wasn't just the occasional moment of terror. It was the constant, insidious presence of existential dread and the profound psychological burden of living a life perpetually on the brink of disaster. For a samurai's wife, every day carried the weight of potential ruin, turning even mundane tasks into a testament to her quiet, brutal endurance against a world defined by constant, unpredictable fear. The academic debate about the precise psychological impact of this constant fear on samurai women often grapples with whether it primarily led to widespread trauma and emotional suppression, or if it fostered an unparalleled sense of resilience and inner strength. Some historians argue that the relentless pressures and omnipresent threats of samurai life often resulted in profound psychological distress, chronic anxiety, and the enforced suppression of genuine emotion, leading to a quiet, internalized suffering that rarely found expression, suggesting that their strength was often a facade born of necessity, masking immense personal misery. They contend that the fear was overwhelmingly damaging. Conversely, other scholars emphasize the remarkable capacity for adaptation and the profound sense of duty that allowed many samurai wives to transmute their fear into a formidable mental fortitude, arguing that while challenging, these conditions fostered an exceptional inner strength, resourcefulness, and a quiet dignity that enabled them to navigate immense adversity and serve as the unshakable anchors of their families, making them symbols of true, unyielding resilience. They suggest that the fear forged character. It's a debate that makes you ponder the immense power of the human spirit to endure, and how much of our modern comfort relies on the quiet certainty that your home won't be overrun by invading armies tomorrow. As the quiet hum of distant battle cries and the faint echoes of whispered fears from our journey slowly fade, and the gentle rhythm of your room returns, you are left with a stark understanding of why a life of constant fear was often a truly agonizing and miserable experience for a samurai's wife. These weren't just passing worries. They were fundamental challenges that brought real pain, profound anxiety, and constant reminders of human fragility in a world defined by war, intrigue, and rigid social codes. Their very existence, however privileged, was always shadowed by the very real possibility of betrayal, invasion, or utter ruin. Take a moment to appreciate the comforting, invisible shield of peace, personal freedom, and the rule of law, a reassurance that was a distant, dangerous dream for those who braved the awful side of ancient feudal life. As the quiet hum of distant battle cries and the faint echoes of whispered fears from our last chapter mercifully fade, allowing the gentle rhythm of your room to truly settle, we now face another relentless, grinding reality that defined the life of a samurai's wife. Unrelenting domestic duty. Forget your dishwashers, your vacuum cleaners, and the notion of delegating household tasks. For these women, the management of a samurai household, regardless of its size, was a meticulous, physically demanding, and ceaseless undertaking, turning every day into a marathon of chores, budgeting, and personnel management, all under the shadow of strict societal expectations and the constant need to uphold family honor. Imagine yourself as a young woman, perhaps the newlywed wife of a mid-ranking samurai in a bustling Edo period city like Kyoto, or, in our parallel American narrative, the lady of a large, self-sufficient plantation during the antebellum South. You are expected to oversee every aspect of daily life, from the precise preparation of meals to the mending of clothes, from managing servants and their numerous disputes to ensuring the family's finances are meticulously balanced. Your day begins before dawn and ends long after dusk, with hardly a moment for personal respite. You might grumble about doing laundry or cooking dinner tonight, but at least your biggest worry isn't whether a single imperfection in your household management could bring shame upon your husband's entire lineage, or if a rogue servant might be plotting against you. The most disturbing fact about this unrelenting domestic duty was its all-encompassing nature and the severe consequences of failure. A samurai household was not just a home, it was a microcosm of the larger feudal system, a unit that needed to run with absolute precision to support the samurai's public duties and maintain his honor. This meant the wife was essentially the chief operating officer, responsible for everything from the spiritual well-being of the family to the practical management of resources, finance, and personnel, with no room for error. Imagine being solely responsible for a complex organization. But if you make a mistake, it's not just a bad performance review, it's a blight on your family's name, potentially leading to social ruin or financial destitution. It's like running a multinational corporation, but your boardroom is your kitchen, and your performance is judged by ancient, unforgiving standards. The sheer physical labor involved in daily tasks was immense, even with servants. While wealthy samurai wives had retainers, they were still expected to oversee, instruct, and often participate in tasks that are now fully mechanized or outsourced. Preparing meals from scratch, often over open fires, involved grinding grains, cleaning vegetables, and portioning meager rations. Cleaning involved sweeping, scrubbing, and carrying water, often without modern detergents or plumbing. Mending and making clothes was a constant, time-consuming endeavor. Imagine doing all your laundry by hand, heating water over a fire, and then mending every garment by candlelight, all before the sun even fully rises, a common historical fact. Even for high-ranking samurai families, the wife was often directly involved in the management of rice stores and budgeting the household stipends. Rice was the primary form of wealth and payment for samurai. The wife's ability to meticulously manage these rice supplies, ensuring the family survived lean times and had enough to pay servants or contribute to their lord, was a critical skill that directly impacted the family's financial stability and prestige. Imagine having to literally count grains of rice to ensure your family's survival, and that your husband's entire income depended on your shrewd accounting. One particularly grim, lesser-known detail about unrelenting domestic duty involves the intense pressure to maintain a perfect, serene outward appearance of the household, regardless of internal chaos or hardship. Samurai culture emphasized outward decorum and presentation. Even if the family was facing severe financial difficulties, illness, or internal strife, the samurai wife was expected to ensure the home always appeared orderly, harmonious, and prosperous. This meant meticulously arranging flowers, serving tea with flawless grace, and always presenting a composed, unruffled demeanor to guests, even if she had just spent hours struggling with a defiant servant or weeping over a sick child. Imagine having to put on a perfect show of domestic bliss for every visitor, knowing that any crack in the facade could be seen as a sign of weakness or dishonor, forcing you to live a life of constant emotional performance. It's like living in a perfectly staged dollhouse, but the dolls are secretly screaming inside. The management of servants and retainers was another complex and often draining duty. A samurai household could have numerous servants, from maids and cooks to stable boys and gardeners. The wife was responsible for their hiring, training, discipline, and daily supervision. This often involved mediating disputes, dealing with laziness or insubordination, and ensuring that the household ran smoothly without creating opportunities for gossip or scandal that could harm the family's reputation. Imagine being a manager of a large staff, but without HR departments, legal recourse, or established protocols, where your authority relied solely on your personal strength and reputation. And every servant could potentially be a source of trouble. Furthermore, the constant need for financial oversight and frugal management was a heavy burden, particularly given the often precarious financial situation of many samurai families. While their husbands were focused on military duties, wives were the ones stretching meager stipends, bartering for goods, and making difficult decisions about what the family could afford. During times of war or economic hardship, this could mean severe belt-tightening, making do with less, and ensuring the children didn't starve, all while maintaining the outward appearance of dignity. Imagine being a chief financial officer, but your budget is constantly shrinking, and every penny counts towards the survival of your family. Turning your personal ingenuity into a matter of life or death, the psychological toll of such unrelenting duty was immense. It fostered a deep sense of responsibility, a pervasive feeling of being constantly overwhelmed, and a profound suppression of personal desires. Every moment was dedicated to the service of others: her husband, her children, her family's honor. This wasn't just physical exhaustion, it was the quiet, gnawing burden of ceaseless obligation. A constant battle against a system that demanded perfection and offered little personal reward. Their desperate coping mechanisms included meticulous scheduling and organization, developing highly detailed routines and strict household rules to manage the overwhelming number of tasks and personnel, delegation and supervision, learning to effectively delegate tasks to servants while maintaining vigilant oversight to ensure quality and prevent shirking, developing practical skills, becoming highly proficient in budgeting, cooking, sewing, and other essential domestic arts to ensure self-sufficiency and efficiency, finding solace in small joys. Cultivating simple pleasures like gardening, tea ceremony, or quiet contemplation, as brief moments of personal escape from duty. Emotional compartmentalization, learning to separate their personal feelings from their public duties, allowing them to remain composed and efficient even in times of great stress or sorrow. The misery wasn't just the endless chores, it was the constant, overwhelming pressure of absolute responsibility and the profound internal struggle to maintain perfection while facing relentless physical and emotional demands. For a samurai's wife, every day was a testament to her quiet, brutal endurance against a system that demanded everything and offered little personal freedom. The academic debate about the impact of these domestic duties on the lives of samurai women often grapples with whether these roles were inherently oppressive or provided a unique sphere of influence and power within the household. Some historians argue that the relentless nature of these duties, coupled with rigid social expectations and a lack of personal autonomy, created a life of profound burden and subjugation, where women were essentially unpaid managers of a patriarchal system. Their skills and intelligence channeled into supporting male family members with little recognition or personal fulfillment. They contend that the misery of domestic duty was overwhelmingly oppressive. Conversely, other scholars emphasize that within the confines of their roles, many samurai wives developed formidable organizational skills, shrewd financial acumen, and considerable informal power as the managers of the household economy and the educators of their children, suggesting that while demanding, these duties provided a vital and respected domain where women could exercise significant influence and contribute indispensably to the family's survival and success, making them figures of quiet, formidable power within their assigned sphere. They suggest that the unrelenting duty also fostered undeniable strength. It's a debate that makes you ponder the unseen labor that underpins every society, and how much of our modern freedom relies on the quiet certainty that our homes are not battlefields of endless, invisible chores. As the quiet hum of busy household activity and the faint echoes of ceaseless duties from our journey slowly fade, and the gentle rhythm of your room returns, you are left with a stark understanding of why unrelenting domestic duty was often a truly agonizing and miserable experience for a samurai's wife. These weren't just daily tasks, they were fundamental challenges that brought real physical exhaustion, profound mental strain, and constant reminders of human fragility in a world defined by strict expectations and endless obligation. Their very existence, however privileged, was always shadowed by the very real possibility of failure, disgrace, or utter exhaustion. Take a moment to appreciate the comforting, invisible shield of modern conveniences, shared responsibilities, and the freedom to define your own domestic role, a reassurance that was a distant, dangerous dream for those who braved the awful side of ancient feudal life. As the quiet hum of busy household activity and the faint echoes of ceaseless duties from our last chapter mercifully fade, allowing the gentle rhythm of your room to truly settle, we now confront perhaps the most suffocating aspect of a samurai wife's existence: strict social constraints. Forget your personal freedoms, your right to self-expression, and the notion of choosing your own path in life. For these women, every aspect of their being, from their public demeanor to their private thoughts, was meticulously governed by an intricate web of rigid societal rules, gender roles, and unwavering expectations, turning their lives into a carefully choreographed performance where deviation meant disgrace and personal desires were a dangerous indulgence. Imagine yourself as a young woman of the samurai class in feudal Japan, perhaps in a well-established castle town like Himeji during a time of relative peace. But in our alternate American narrative, let's place you in a rigidly conservative high society household in New England during the Victorian era. You are constantly aware of the invisible eyes of society upon you, judging your every move. Your posture must be perfect, your voice soft and demure, your opinions unspoken unless directly asked, and even then carefully phrased to reflect your husband's views. You are expected to embody grace, modesty, and unwavering loyalty. Sacrificing your own individuality for the sake of your family's reputation and your husband's honor. You might occasionally feel pressure to conform to social norms in your workplace or community, but at least your biggest worry isn't whether a single misstep in etiquette could bring shame upon your entire family, or if expressing an original thought could lead to severe social ostracism. The most disturbing fact about these strict social constraints was their all-encompassing nature and the profound suppression of individual identity. From birth, a samurai daughter was trained not to be an individual, but a perfect embodiment of her role first as a dutiful daughter, then as an obedient wife, and finally as a virtuous mother. Her personal desires, opinions, and even emotions were secondary to the needs of her family and the honor of her husband's house. She was taught Bushido, the way of the warrior, not for battle but for inner discipline, emphasizing loyalty, self-control, and the suppression of fear and personal desire. Imagine living in a world where your entire identity is defined by a script written for you by centuries of tradition, and any deviation from that script is met with severe social censure. It's like being a character in a play that never ends, and you're never allowed to improvise, only deliver your lines perfectly. Gender roles were rigidly defined and strictly enforced. Men were the public face of the family, responsible for warfare, politics, and external affairs. Women were the domestic anchor, responsible for managing the household, raising children, and maintaining family honor within the home. Any blurring of these lines was seen as a threat to the social order. While women sometimes held considerable informal power within the household, as we touched upon in Chapter 2, this power was rarely acknowledged publicly and never allowed to challenge male authority. Imagine being highly intelligent and capable, but your sphere of influence is strictly limited to the domestic realm, and your achievements are only recognized indirectly through your husband's success. A common historical fact: the ideal samurai wife was expected to embody Anna Bugeisha virtues female martial artist, which, while sometimes implying martial training for defense of the home, primarily focused on internal strength, unwavering loyalty, and the ability to endure hardship and maintain household order with grace. This stoic ideal emphasized spiritual fortitude over outward displays of personal opinion or emotion, firmly cementing their role as domestic pillars rather than public figures. Imagine being trained for self-defense, not to fight on the battlefield, but to defend your honor in your own home, even against yourself. One particularly grim, lesser-known detail about strict social constraints involves the subtle, yet pervasive, societal pressure to police each other's conformity, turning communities into a network of watchful eyes. It wasn't just formal rules, the informal social pressure within samurai communities was immense. Women were expected to observe and subtly correct the behavior of their peers, and any perceived lapse in decorum by one woman could reflect poorly on her entire family or even her clan. This created an atmosphere of constant, low-level surveillance, where every gathering was a potential stage for judgment, and every neighbor a potential enforcer of social norms. Imagine attending a social tea, not just to enjoy company, but knowing that every gesture, every intonation, every detail of your attire is being scrutinized by others who would subtly, or not so subtly, report any perceived impropriety to their own families. This turned social interaction into a source of constant, quiet anxiety. It's like living in a reality TV show, but the prize for best behavior is simply avoiding public shame. The lack of mobility and limited interaction with the outside world further tightened these social constraints. While samurai men traveled for duty, their wives often lived secluded lives within their compounds or castle towns, with limited opportunities to interact with people outside their immediate social circle. This isolation reinforced the strictures, as there were fewer external influences to challenge traditional norms. Imagine living your entire adult life within a very small geographical and social radius, where your worldview is shaped almost entirely by the expectations of your immediate family and peers, with little exposure to alternative ways of life. This created a profound sense of insularity and conformity. Furthermore, that the consequences of failing to conform were severe. extending beyond mere social disapproval. A woman who violated social norms, whether through perceived impropriety, gossip, or a failure in her duties, could bring disgrace upon her husband, potentially harming his career or even leading to his disinheritance. In extreme cases, a woman could be divorced, banished, or even forced into a convent, her life utterly ruined, all for failing to adhere to an unspoken rule. Imagine losing everything: your home, your children, your very identity because you dared to speak your mind, or simply failed to maintain an impossible standard of perfection. This was a constant, terrifying deterrent against any form of individual expression. The psychological toll of living under such strict social constraints was immense. It fostered a deep sense of self-censorship, a pervasive feeling of being trapped, and a profound suppression of personal aspirations. Authenticity was a dangerous luxury. Conformity was a survival mechanism. This wasn't just about external pressure, it was the quiet, gnawing pain of a life lived without genuine self-expression. A constant battle against an invisible cage that defined your every move. Their desperate coping mechanisms included mastery of etiquette, becoming flawlessly proficient in all forms of social decorum, including tea ceremony, flower arranging, and traditional arts, to channel their intellect and skill into socially acceptable forms of excellence. Internalized discipline, developing profound inner self-control and emotional regulation. A private strength that allowed them to navigate external pressures without visible cracks. Subtle influence learning to exert influence indirectly. Through persuasion, gentle suggestion, and careful manipulation of household dynamics rather than direct confrontation. Finding joy in private spaces. Cultivating small personal havens within their homes. A secluded garden corner. A quiet room for poetry or calligraphy where they could momentarily escape public scrutiny. Focus on legacy-deriving purpose from ensuring the prosperity and honor of their children and future generations. Shifting their personal desires towards the collective good of the family. The misery wasn't just the rules, it was the constant, insidious suppression of their true selves and the profound internal struggle to find meaning and dignity within a life that offered little personal freedom. For a samurai's wife, every day was a testament to her quiet, brutal endurance against a system that demanded absolute conformity and offered little room for individuality. The academic debate about the long-term impact of these strict social constraints on Japanese society often grapples with whether they fostered a stable, harmonious social order or suppressed individual potential and creativity. Some historians argue that the rigid social structures, while demanding, provided a clear framework for societal functioning, promoting stability, loyalty, and a strong collective identity that allowed Japan to navigate centuries of feudalism and develop unique cultural traditions, suggesting that the constraints ultimately served a vital purpose in maintaining a cohesive society, albeit at a high personal cost. They contend that the misery was a trade-off for order. Conversely, other scholars emphasize that the profound suppression of individual agency, particularly for women, stifled innovation, perpetuated gender inequality, and led to widespread personal unhappiness and unfulfilled potential, arguing that these strictures created a society that was outwardly harmonious but inwardly stifled, fundamentally limiting human flourishing and perpetuating a cycle of quiet suffering that outweighed any purported benefits of social stability. They suggest that the brutal nature of these constraints was their most enduring legacy. It's a debate that makes you ponder the immense privilege of self-determination, and how much of our modern freedom relies on the quiet certainty that your aspirations are not dictated by centuries of rigid social expectations. As the quiet hum of unspoken thoughts and the faint echoes of stifled desires from our journey slowly fade, and the gentle rhythm of your room returns, you are left with a stark understanding of why strict social constraints were often a truly agonizing and miserable experience for a samurai's wife. These weren't just customs, they were fundamental challenges that brought real pain, profound frustration, and constant reminders of human fragility in a world defined by rigid rules and uncompromising expectations. Their very existence, however refined, was always shadowed by the very real possibility of social disgrace, personal annihilation, or utter despair. Take a moment to appreciate the comforting, invisible shield of personal liberty, freedom of expression, and the right to choose your own path, a reassurance that was a distant, dangerous dream for those who braved the awful side of ancient feudal life. As the quiet hum of unspoken thoughts and the faint echoes of stifled desires from our last chapter mercifully fade, allowing the gentle rhythm of your room to truly settle, we now delve into the profoundly challenging inner world of a samurai wife emotional repression. Forget your therapy sessions, your open communication, and the modern emphasis on expressing your feelings. For these women, the very act of feeling especially deeply or negatively was often considered a weakness, a dangerous indulgence that could undermine their family's honor and their husband's composure. They were trained from childhood to cultivate a mask of stoicism, to endure hardship with silent grace, and to suppress their personal pain for the sake of the collective, turning their inner lives into a lonely, often agonizing, battleground. Imagine yourself as a young samurai wife in the late Sengoku period, perhaps living in a castle keep under siege, or in our alternate American narrative, a woman of the upper class during the American Revolution, whose husband is a high-ranking officer constantly away at war, and whose family is facing severe personal losses and constant uncertainty. You've just received news of a devastating defeat on the battlefield, or perhaps a beloved family member has succumbed to illness. Your heart clenches. Your mind reels with grief and fear, but your face remains impassive, your voice steady. You continue your duties, managing the household, comforting others, never once allowing your own profound sorrow or terror to surface. You might cry after a bad day at work, or talk through your anxieties with a friend, but at least your biggest worry isn't whether shedding a single tear could disgrace your entire family, or if expressing your fear could be seen as an act of disloyalty. The most disturbing fact about emotional repression was its internalized nature and the profound psychological burden it created. This wasn't merely about outward appearances. It was about internalizing the expectation that one's emotions, particularly negative ones like fear, grief, anger, or even joy, were not to be indulged. The philosophy of Bushido, though primarily for male warriors, permeated samurai households, teaching self-control, discipline, and the suppression of personal desires for the greater good of the lord and family. For women, this often translated into an expectation of unbreakable composure, even in the face of unimaginable tragedy or personal suffering. Imagine feeling the deepest despair, your heart breaking, but knowing you must never show it, never speak of it, and actively work to push it down, deep inside yourself, until it becomes a quiet, constant ache. It's like living with a never-ending internal monologue of pain. But the volume knob is permanently broken, stuck on mute. The social expectation of perfect decorum meant that any outward display of strong emotion was seen as a sign of weakness, instability, or a lack of proper upbringing, reflecting poorly on the entire family. A samurai wife was a reflection of her husband's honor and status, her composure, her grace, and her ability to handle any crisis with equanimity were critical to maintaining the family's reputation. This forced her to develop an impenetrable emotional mask, presenting a serene facade even when her inner world was in turmoil. Imagine having to smile and offer comforting words to others after receiving news of your child's death, because any sign of your own grief would be considered shameful, a common historical fact. The practice of keeping one's emotions in one's sleeve, a phrase evoking discreetness, especially for women of the samurai class, that was deeply ingrained. Public displays of grief, anger, or even excessive joy were generally frowned upon. Emotional control was a virtue, seen as a sign of inner strength and a reflection of a well-disciplined mind and spirit. This emphasis on outward composure was a cornerstone of their social conditioning. Imagine learning from childhood that your true feelings are a dangerous secret, best hidden away from everyone, even yourself. One particularly grim, lesser-known detail about emotional repression involves the use of artistic and spiritual pursuits as the only socially acceptable outlets for profound inner turmoil. Since direct emotional expression was forbidden, samurai wives often channeled their deepest feelings into highly disciplined art forms like calligraphy, poetry, especially waka or haiku, flower arranging ikebana, or the meticulous steps of the tea ceremony. These practices, while outwardly serene and beautiful, could become private, hidden conduits for processing grief, anxiety, or longing. Imagine pouring your heartbreak into the delicate placement of a single flower, or your unspoken fears into the precise stroke of an ink brush, knowing that this beautiful creation is the only monument to your private suffering that society will allow. This turned art from a simple hobby into a desperate, silent act of self-preservation. It's like writing a secret diary, but the words are in a code only you understand. Hidden within a public masterpiece, the lack of a genuine support system for emotional processing exacerbated the burden. While there might be female companions or trusted elder family members, the cultural norm of emotional stoicism meant that deep, vulnerable conversations about personal pain were rare. Sharing one's true feelings could be seen as a weakness, a complaint, or even a burden on others. This left many women to bear their emotional weight in isolation, fostering a profound sense of loneliness and an inability to truly process trauma. Imagine enduring immense personal loss, but having no one with whom you can truly grieve, no shoulder to cry on, and no words of comfort, forcing you to suffer in silent solitude. Furthermore, the pervasive fear of bringing shame to the husband or family acted as a powerful deterrent against any emotional lapse. A wife's emotional instability, however understandable given her circumstances, could be interpreted as a sign of her husband's inability to control his household, or a reflection of weak character within the lineage. This placed an immense, often unbearable pressure on women to maintain an unwavering front, even when their world was crumbling, prioritizing family honor over their own mental well-being. Imagine the weight of knowing that your every tear, every sigh, could be a black mark against the man you married, forcing you to literally internalize your suffering to protect his reputation. The psychological toll of living with such ingrained emotional repression was immense. It fostered a deep sense of psychological fragmentation, a pervasive feeling of being disconnected from one's own true self, and a profound inability to articulate personal pain. Authenticity was sacrificed at the altar of duty. This wasn't just about controlling outward behavior, it was the quiet, gnawing pain of a life lived without genuine emotional release, a constant battle against an invisible prison within one's own mind. Their desperate coping mechanisms included the iron mask of composure, cultivating an outward appearance of absolute calm and serenity, regardless of internal turmoil, often achieved through years of rigorous self-discipline, symbolic expression, using subtle, coded forms of communication in poetry, calligraphy, or garden design to express emotions too dangerous to voice directly, spiritual retreat, seeking solace in Buddhist practices, meditation, or quiet contemplation, focusing on detachment from worldly suffering, channeling into duty, redirecting emotional energy into hyper-focus on domestic duties, caring for children or serving others, finding purpose in external tasks, internalized narrative, developing a private internal world where emotions could be acknowledged, but never acted upon, creating a secret emotional landscape. The misery wasn't just the occasional moment of sadness, it was the constant, insidious suppression of their entire emotional spectrum, and the profound internal battle to maintain an impossible standard of composure. For a samurai's wife, every day was a testament to her quiet, brutal endurance against a system that demanded emotional invisibility and offered little space for authentic human feeling. The academic debate about the long-term psychological consequences of such pervasive emotional repression in samurai society often grapples with whether it produced individuals of extraordinary resilience and self-control, or led to widespread unaddressed trauma and mental health issues. Some historians argue that the disciplined focus on emotional restraint fostered immense inner strength, fortitude, and a stoic capacity to endure hardship, creating individuals capable of navigating profound adversity with grace and dignity, suggesting that while challenging, this cultural emphasis ultimately forged a powerful psychological resilience that allowed both men and women to thrive within a demanding feudal system. They contend that the misery was a crucible for character. Conversely, other scholars emphasize that the enforced suppression of emotion inevitably led to significant psychological distress, chronic anxiety, depression, and an inability to process grief or trauma, arguing that while individuals may have appeared composed, their inner lives were often fraught with unacknowledged pain, leading to a pervasive, silent suffering that profoundly impacted their well-being and limited their capacity for genuine human connection, making the brutal nature of this repression its most enduring legacy. They suggest that the composure was often a form of profound psychological harm. It's a debate that makes you ponder the immense privilege of emotional freedom, and how much of our modern mental well-being relies on the quiet certainty that your feelings, however complex, are valid and can be openly expressed without fear of societal condemnation. As the quiet hum of stifled sighs and the faint echoes of unspoken tears from our journey slowly fade, and the gentle rhythm of your room returns, you are left with a stark understanding of why emotional repression was often a truly agonizing and miserable experience for a samurai's wife. These weren't just personal preferences. They were fundamental challenges that brought real pain, profound loneliness, and constant reminders of human fragility in a world that demanded an impossible level of self-control. Their very existence, however refined, was always shadowed by the very real possibility of internal collapse, personal despair, or utter emotional isolation. Take a moment to appreciate the comforting, invisible shield of emotional authenticity, supportive relationships, and the freedom to feel a reassurance that was a distant, dangerous dream for those who braved the awful side of ancient feudal life. As the quiet hum of stifled sighs and the faint echoes of unspoken tears from our last chapter mercifully fade, allowing the gentle rhythm of your room to truly settle, we now confront perhaps the most primal and terrifying aspect of a samurai wife's life: childbearing peril. Forget your prenatal care, your sterile hospitals, and the incredible advancements of modern medicine. For these women, every pregnancy was a journey into profound uncertainty, every delivery a life or death gamble, and the relentless pressure to produce male heirs transformed what should have been a joyful creation into a harrowing ordeal fraught with physical agony, emotional dread, and the constant threat of death, both for mother and child. Imagine yourself as a young samurai wife in feudal Japan, perhaps in the 17th century, newly married and facing the expectation of starting a family. Or, in our parallel American narrative, a woman on a remote frontier farm in the early 1800s, with no access to doctors or medical assistance. You know that within your village or community, tales of women dying in childbirth are not just stories, they are grim realities. You witness miscarriages, stillbirths, and mothers succumbing to puerperal fever or hemorrhage. The pressure to bear a son is immense, not just for your husband's happiness, but for the continuation of his lineage, the inheritance of his lands, and the family's honor. You might worry about finding the right stroller or decorating the nursery, but at least your biggest concern isn't whether you will survive the birth of your child, or if the very act of bringing life into the world could cost you your own. The most disturbing fact about childbearing peril was the overwhelming mortality rate and the sheer lack of medical intervention. In ancient and pre-modern societies, childbirth was the leading cause of death for women of reproductive age. Without understanding of hygiene, sanitation, or the mechanics of difficult births, simple infections, prolonged labor, or excessive bleeding could quickly become fatal. Midwives did their best, but their knowledge was largely empirical, and they had little to offer in the face of serious complications. Imagine going into labor, knowing that your life is literally on the line, that your screaming body is fighting a battle only nature can win, and that the best help available is a few herbal remedies and desperate prayers. It's like playing Russian roulette with every pregnancy. But the stakes are your life and your child's. The immense pressure to produce male heirs exacerbated the peril. For a samurai family, the continuation of the lineage through a son was paramount. A wife who failed to produce a male heir, or produced only daughters, faced immense social pressure, could be ostracized, or even divorced for barrenness, regardless of her actual fertility or the husband's role. This meant that women were often pushed to have multiple pregnancies, increasing their exposure to the dangers of childbirth with each attempt, all in the desperate hope of securing a male successor. Imagine being forced to risk your life repeatedly, not for joy, but for the grim duty of producing a specific gender, with your value as a woman tied solely to your reproductive success, a common historical fact. In feudal Japan, it was common for high-ranking samurai families to adopt a male heir from a branch family or even an unrelated family if the primary wife failed to produce a son. While this provided a solution for lineage continuation, it often placed immense emotional strain on the wife, who might feel inadequate or that her role had been diminished, even if she had borne healthy daughters. This cultural practice underscores the absolute societal imperative for male heirs, often at the psychological expense of the mother. Imagine having to live with the constant, unspoken message that your own biological children were not enough, simply because of their gender. One particularly grim, lesser-known detail about childbearing peril involves the pervasive fear of producing a child with a disability or perceived weakness, and the social stigma attached. Beyond the danger of death, there was a profound anxiety about the health and fitness of the child. In a society where physical prowess and mental acuity were highly valued, particularly for male heirs, a child born with a significant disability or chronic illness could be seen as a source of shame, a burden on the family, or even a bad omen. While not always directly abandoned, such children might face neglect, limited opportunities, or be hidden from public view, and the mother might bear the silent blame. Imagine giving birth to a vulnerable child, and instead of joy, your heart is filled with a new, agonizing fear that this precious life will be judged as imperfect, bringing subtle yet pervasive shame upon your family, and that your own body will be blamed for this perceived flaw. This added a layer of profound guilt and apprehension to an already perilous process. It's like facing a terrifying exam, but the grade is written on your child's very being, and your own body is the silent culprit. The lack of proper nutrition and rest during pregnancy and postpartum further compounded the dangers. While some samurai wives might have had access to better food than commoners, their diets were often still limited by seasonal availability, cultural norms, and the family's financial situation. Furthermore, the relentless domestic duties, remember Chapter 2's unrelenting domestic duty, meant that women rarely had the opportunity for adequate rest during pregnancy or recovery after childbirth, making them more susceptible to complications and infections. Imagine being constantly exhausted, perpetually underfed, and still expected to carry a pregnancy to term and then immediately resume arduous physical duties, with your body never truly recovering between births. Furthermore, the limited understanding of infant and child mortality meant that mothers often faced the heartbreaking reality of losing multiple children in infancy or early childhood to disease, malnutrition, or accidents. While childbirth was dangerous, the first few years of a child's life were also incredibly precarious. Each successful birth was followed by years of anxiety. Watching helplessly as illness or misfortune could snatch away a beloved child. Imagine giving birth, surviving the ordeal, only to live in constant dread of losing your precious, fragile child to a fever or a cough, knowing that most of your children might not live to adulthood, forcing you to guard your heart even as you love them fiercely. The psychological toll of living with such childbearing peril was immense. It fostered a deep sense of vulnerability, a pervasive fear of physical agony and death, and a profound emotional guardedness against the inevitable heartbreak of loss. Motherhood, while cherished, was shadowed by the constant threat of tragedy. This wasn't just about physical risk, it was the quiet, gnawing dread of biological roulette, a constant battle against a world where bringing life into being was often a prelude to loss and suffering. Their desperate coping mechanisms included prayers and superstitions, relying heavily on religious rituals, talismans, and traditional folk beliefs to seek divine protection for themselves and their unborn children, obeying traditional wisdom, strictly adhering to ancient dietary advice, labor practices, and postpartum rituals passed down through generations, even if their efficacy was limited, building a support network relying on experienced older women, midwives, and female family members for guidance and practical assistance during pregnancy and childbirth. Emotional detachment partial. Some women might have unconsciously developed a degree of emotional detachment from their infants, a painful protective mechanism against the almost inevitable heartbreak of high infant mortality. Resilience in loss. Developing an extraordinary capacity to endure profound grief and continue their duties even after repeated losses. Driven by the need to secure the family's future, the misery wasn't just the pain of labor, it was the constant, overwhelming threat of death for both mother and child, and the profound emotional anguish of a life defined by perilous creation and almost inevitable loss. For a samurai's wife, every pregnancy was a testament to her quiet, brutal endurance against a system that demanded heirs and offered little safety or solace. The academic debate about the long-term demographic and social impact of high childbearing peril in feudal Japan often grapples with whether these challenges ultimately led to a stronger, more resilient population, or created a society burdened by pervasive grief and limited demographic growth. Some historians argue that while incredibly harsh, the high mortality rates and the intense pressure for male heirs, combined with the resilience of women, ensured the continuation of powerful lineages and the constant replenishment of the samurai class, suggesting that these perils were part of a brutal natural selection that ultimately sustained the social and political structure of feudal Japan, driving families to maintain their numbers and strength. They contend that the misery, paradoxically, contributed to a form of societal stability. Conversely, other scholars emphasize the profound human cost of such high peril, arguing that it led to widespread maternal and infant mortality, immense personal suffering for women, and a society constantly grappling with grief and demographic instability, fundamentally limiting individual flourishing and creating a pervasive sense of precariousness that outweighed any purported benefits of lineage continuation, highlighting that the brutal nature of childbirth was a constant source of agony. They suggest that the peril was a pervasive, destructive force. It's a debate that makes you ponder the immense privilege of safe childbirth, and how much of our modern sense of security relies on the quiet certainty that bringing a child into the world is now a joyous event, not a terrifying gamble with death. As the quiet hum of new life's fragile beginnings and the faint echoes of desperate prayers from our journey slowly fade, and the gentle rhythm of your room returns, you are left with a stark understanding of why childbearing peril was often a truly agonizing and miserable experience for a samurai's wife. These weren't just biological processes. They were fundamental challenges that brought real pain, profound fear, and constant reminders of human fragility in a world that demanded heirs above all else. Their very existence, however cherished, was always shadowed by the very real possibility of death, loss, or unbearable grief. Take a moment to appreciate the comforting, invisible shield of modern medicine, prenatal care, and the expectation of safe delivery, a reassurance that was a distant, dangerous dream for those who braved the awful side of ancient feudal life. As the quiet hum of new life's fragile beginnings and the faint echoes of desperate prayers from our last chapter mercifully fade, allowing the gentle rhythm of your room to truly settle, we now turn to a fundamental, yet often unromanticized aspect of a samurai wife's existence. Arranged marriages and alliances? Forget your notions of falling in love, choosing your partner, or building a relationship based on mutual affection. For these women, marriage was rarely a personal choice. It was a cold, calculated transaction, a strategic alliance between powerful families, turning their most intimate relationship into a lifelong duty dictated by political necessity, where personal happiness was a fleeting possibility. And the stakes were always the honor and survival of their lineage. Imagine yourself as a young, eligible daughter of a samurai family in feudal Japan, perhaps in the late 16th century, a time of intense political maneuvering between powerful warlords. Or in our alternate American narrative, a young woman of a prominent industrialist family in the Gilded Age, destined to marry into a rival business empire to solidify corporate control. You have little to no say in your future. Your parents, advised by family elders and political strategists, meticulously choose your husband based not on his personality or your compatibility, but on his family's wealth, power, military strength, or strategic location. You may meet him only briefly before the wedding. If at all, you are expected to accept this fate with grace. Understanding that your entire life is a sacrifice for your family's advancement, you might complain about a bad date or difficult boss. But at least your biggest worry isn't whether your entire future, your personal happiness, and your family's very survival depend on a marriage decided solely by others, often for reasons of power and influence. The most disturbing fact about arranged marriages was the profound absence of personal choice and the complete subjugation of individual desire to familial and political necessity. Young women were raised with the understanding that their marriages would be for the benefit of their clan, not for their personal fulfillment. This meant accepting a husband who might be much older, a complete stranger, or even someone you found personally unappealing, all in the name of duty. Imagine preparing for a lifetime commitment to someone you barely know, knowing that your personal feelings are irrelevant, and that any attempt to assert your own desires would be seen as a selfish betrayal of your family. It's like being a pawn on a chessboard, but the game is your entire life, and your moves are decided by grand strategists, not by your own will. The primary purpose of these marriages was to forge or strengthen political and military alliances. In a fragmented and often warring feudal landscape, marriage ties were one of the most effective ways to secure loyalty, pool resources, or prevent conflict between powerful families. Daughters were therefore valuable assets, human bridges connecting clans, ensuring stability or opening new opportunities for their male relatives. Imagine being born into a world where your very existence is a strategic tool, your marriage a diplomatic treaty, and your children destined to inherit not just a name, but a complex web of familial obligations and political maneuvers, a common historical fact. During the Sengoku period, marriages were frequently arranged between the daughters of powerful daimyo feudal lords and the sons of other influential lords to form temporary alliances. These alliances were often fragile and could shift rapidly, but the daughters involved served as critical, often tragic, figures in these political maneuvers, sometimes being effectively traded between families as loyalties changed. Embodying the ultimate sacrifice of personal autonomy for their clan's survival? Imagine being married off for political reasons, only to find yourself divorced and remarried to a new, equally unfamiliar lord a few years later. As the political winds shifted, one particularly grim, lesser-known detail about arranged marriages and alliances involves the subtle, yet pervasive, emotional abuse and neglect that could arise from a loveless or mismatched union, exacerbated by the impossibility of divorce or escape. While some arranged marriages genuinely grew into affectionate partnerships, many did not. A samurai wife might find herself married to a cruel, indifferent, or even abusive husband, with no recourse. Divorce was extremely difficult for women to initiate, and returning to her birth family often brought shame upon them. This meant that she was effectively trapped, forced to endure a lifetime in a potentially miserable relationship, constantly performing the role of a devoted wife, while her inner world withered from neglect or mistreatment. Imagine living every day with a polite stranger, or worse, a tormentor, knowing that your only escape is death. and that your private suffering must never be revealed. For the sake of appearances, this turned her personal life into a silent, agonizing prison. It's like being cast in a play where your co-star actively despises you, but you're contractually bound for life, and the audience can never know. The constant pressure to adapt and assimilate into a new, often unfamiliar family added another layer of stress. Upon marriage, a samurai wife essentially left her birth family and became a full member of her husband's household, expected to adopt their customs, traditions, and loyalties. This could involve learning new dialects, adapting to different domestic routines, and navigating complex power dynamics with her new mother-in-law and sisters-in-law, all while maintaining absolute respect and obedience. Imagine moving into a new, demanding family at a young age, with no prior relationship, and being expected to seamlessly blend in, completely shedding your old identity, knowing that your acceptance hinges on your flawless conformity. Furthermore, the consequences of a failed alliance, even if not the wife's fault, could be devastating for her personally. If the political alliance forged by her marriage crumbled, she could be treated as a hostage, returned to her family in disgrace, or even executed as a political pawn. Recall the echoes of Chapter 1's Life of Constant Fear and Chapter 9's Competition and Conflict. Her personal fate was inextricably linked to the volatile geopolitical landscape, making her a living embodiment of the alliance's success or failure, with her own life often hanging in the balance. Imagine living in a constant state of apprehension, knowing that your personal safety depends entirely on the stability of a political treaty written in your blood. The psychological toll of living in such an institutionally enforced, non-consensual marriage was immense. It fostered a deep sense of resignation, a pervasive feeling of being commodified, and a profound suppression of personal aspirations for love, companionship, or genuine affection. Authenticity in relationships was a rare luxury. This wasn't just about arranged unions, it was the quiet, gnawing pain of a life lived without romantic choice. A constant battle against a system that viewed women as tools for lineage perpetuation and political maneuvering. Their desperate coping mechanisms included duty as a foundation, embracing the concept of giri duty and obligation as the primary basis for the marriage, finding purpose in fulfilling their role rather than seeking emotional fulfillment, cultivating informal power, learning to exert influence through household management, raising successful children, and maintaining impeccable family honor, earning respect even if affection was absent, finding solace in motherhood, channeling their emotional needs into deep bonds with their children, often finding their greatest personal fulfillment in their role as mothers, spiritual retreat, seeking inner peace and detachment through Buddhist practices or personal contemplation as a way to cope with emotional loneliness, developing resignation with grace, learning to accept their fate with outward calm and dignity, finding strength in their ability to endure and adapt. The misery wasn't just the lack of love, it was the constant, insidious suppression of their deepest human desires for connection and autonomy, and the profound internal struggle to find meaning and dignity within a relationship dictated by external forces. For a samurai's wife, every aspect of her marriage was a testament to her quiet, brutal endurance against a system that demanded obedience and offered little personal choice. The academic debate about the long-term societal impact of arranged marriages in feudal Japan often grapples with whether they fostered societal stability and strong family lineages or perpetuated gender inequality and suppressed individual happiness. Some historians argue that despite the personal sacrifices, the system of arranged marriages and strategic alliances was a crucial pillar of feudal society, promoting political stability, consolidating power among ruling families, and ensuring the continuity of lineages, thereby contributing to the long-term social cohesion and development of the Japanese state. Suggesting that the brutal nature was a necessary trade-off for order, they contend that the misery was for a greater good. Conversely, other scholars emphasize the profound personal costs of these forced unions, arguing that they led to widespread unhappiness, limited women's agency, perpetuated patriarchal structures, and often resulted in loveless and emotionally abusive relationships, fundamentally hindering individual flourishing and creating a society where personal well-being was systematically sacrificed for abstract notions of familial honor and political power, highlighting that the brutal nature was their most enduring legacy. They suggest that the alliances came at too high a human price. It's a debate that makes you ponder the immense privilege of choosing your own partner, and how much of our modern sense of relationship fulfillment relies on the quiet certainty that your love is a choice, not a strategic negotiation. As the quiet hum of distant wedding ceremonies and the faint echoes of unspoken vows from our journey slowly fade, and the gentle rhythm of your room returns, you are left with a stark understanding of why arranged marriages and alliances were often a truly agonizing and miserable experience for a samurai's wife. These weren't just social events, they were fundamental challenges that brought real pain, profound loneliness, and constant reminders of human fragility in a world that demanded duty above all else. Their very existence, however honored, was always shadowed by the very real possibility of a loveless life, strategic exploitation, or utter personal despair. Take a moment to appreciate the comforting, invisible shield of personal choice, romantic love, and the freedom to build your own relationships, a reassurance that was a distant, dangerous dream for those who braved the awful side of ancient feudal life. As the quiet hum of distant wedding ceremonies and the faint echoes of unspoken vows from our last chapter mercifully fade, allowing the gentle rhythm of your room to truly settle, we now turn our gaze to a pervasive, underlying anxiety that plagued every samurai household: economic precarity. Forget your fixed incomes, your savings accounts, and the relative stability of a modern capitalist economy. For a samurai's wife, the financial well-being of her family was a constant tightrope walk, perpetually vulnerable to the whims of their lord, the devastations of war, the unpredictability of harvests, and the sheer inefficiency of a pre-modern feudal system, turning their daily lives into a constant battle against poverty, debt, and the terrifying prospect of sudden, utter ruin. Imagine yourself as the wife of a mid-ranking samurai during a prolonged period of peace. Say, in the late 17th century Edo period. While outwardly your family appears respectable, your husband's stipend, paid in rice, is barely enough to cover expenses, and a bad harvest means its value plummets. You are constantly calculating, rationing, and finding creative ways to stretch your meager resources. Then, suddenly, your husband's lord demands a large contribution for a new castle construction, or your husband is ordered to an expensive, distant posting, and you realize your family is one bad season, one misstep, or one unexpected expense away from destitution. You might worry about your retirement fund or the fluctuating stock market, but at least your biggest concern isn't whether your entire family could lose their home, their status, and their very means of survival overnight due to a lord's whim or a distant, unforeseen famine. The most disturbing fact about economic precarity was its inherent instability and the complete lack of a financial safety net. The samurai class, particularly the lower and mid-ranking samurai, often lived on fixed stipends, usually paid in rice. Remember our discussion in Chapter 2, Unrelenting Domestic Duty, about managing rice stores. These stipends were subject to the whims of their daimyo feudal lord, who could reduce them, demand contributions, or even dispossess samurai without warning. Furthermore, the value of rice itself fluctuated with harvests, meaning a good harvest could depress prices and reduce their real income, while a bad harvest meant hunger. Imagine living with an income that could be arbitrarily cut at any moment, and whose real value changed with the weather, making long-term planning utterly impossible. It's like running a household where your monthly salary is paid in a perishable commodity, and your boss can randomly decide to pay you less, or nothing at all, for reasons entirely outside your control. Warfare, while providing opportunities for advancement, was a catastrophic financial burden. When a samurai lord went to war, his retainers, including your husband, were expected to equip themselves, maintain their own soldiers, and often travel long distances at their own expense. This could quickly deplete any savings, force families into debt, or even necessitate selling off precious heirlooms. If the lord lost, the financial ruin was complete, leading to confiscation of lands and total destitution. Imagine your family's entire wealth being gambled on the outcome of a single battle, forcing you to mortgage your home, knowing that defeat means total ruin, a common historical fact. Many lower-ranking samurai during the Edo period 1603-1868, despite their privileged social status, often lived in extreme poverty, struggling to make ends meet on their fixed rice stipends. They often resorted to taking on side jobs, which was officially forbidden for samurai, borrowing from merchants, or even selling their family heirlooms to survive. This pervasive economic hardship for many within the samurai class, particularly during long periods of peace, underscores the deep precarity of their existence, regardless of their social standing. Imagine being part of the elite, but secretly struggling to put food on the table, forced to break the rules just to survive. One particularly grim, lesser-known detail about economic precarity involves the silent shame and desperation of night selling, or secretly pawning family possessions to make ends meet, often performed by samurai wives themselves. To avoid public disgrace, samurai families often went to great lengths to hide their financial struggles. This meant that wives would discreetly take family treasures: a sword guard, a beautiful kimono, a scroll to a pawnbroker or merchant under the cover of darkness, selling them for meager sums to buy food or pay debts. This was a profoundly humiliating act for a family so obsessed with honor. Imagine having to sneak out in the dead of night, clutching a family heirloom, to sell it for food, knowing that if anyone discovered your destitution, it would bring unimaginable shame upon your husband and lineage. This added a layer of profound personal agony to their financial struggles. It's like having a perfectly manicured lawn, but you're secretly selling your furniture to pay the water bill, hoping no one notices. The lack of diversified income streams and reliance on agricultural output made samurai families highly susceptible to economic shocks. Their income was almost entirely tied to their lord's stipend, usually rice, which in turn depended on agricultural yields. A drought, a flood, or a pest infestation could devastate the harvest, leading to food shortages and a plummet in the value of their stipends. Imagine your entire livelihood being dependent on a single crop, constantly at the mercy of unpredictable weather, with no other way to earn money when disaster strikes. This created a persistent undercurrent of anxiety, knowing that natural forces could, at any moment, wipe out your family's means of survival. Furthermore, the burden of social obligations and maintaining appearances further drained already strained finances. Despite poverty, samurai families were expected to maintain a certain standard of living, entertain guests, and participate in social rituals that often required significant expenditure. Lavish clothing, proper tea ceremony utensils, and participation in festivals or gifts for the Lord were not optional. They were obligations that, if neglected, could lead to social ostracism or disgrace, even if they couldn't afford them. Imagine spending money you don't have on lavish parties or expensive gifts, not for pleasure, but because your family's honor depends on maintaining a facade of wealth you simply don't possess. This forced many families into a constant cycle of debt and desperate penny pinching. The psychological toll of living with such economic precarity was immense. It fostered a deep sense of vulnerability, a pervasive feeling of being perpetually on the brink of ruin, and a profound anxiety about the future. Every financial decision was fraught with stress. Every unexpected expense was a crisis. This wasn't just about managing money, it was the quiet, gnawing dread of destitution. A constant battle against a system that offered little security and endless demands. Their desperate coping mechanisms included extreme frugality and austerity, practicing meticulous budgeting, rationing food, mending clothes endlessly, and minimizing all non-essential expenditures to stretch every penny. Skillful bartering and negotiation. Developing shrewd negotiation skills with local merchants and vendors to get the best prices or favorable payment terms. Cultivating informal networks. Building relationships with trusted pawnbrokers or discreet merchants who would offer fair prices for hidden assets or extend credit. Taking on covert work husbands and sometimes wives engaging in secret, forbidden side jobs of teaching handicrafts to supplement their income, risking severe punishment if discovered. Strategic borrowing. Cautiously borrowing from wealthy merchants or moneylenders, often at high interest, as a last resort, hoping for future improved fortunes. The misery wasn't just occasional financial difficulty, it was the constant, insidious threat of total economic collapse and the profound humiliation of struggling to maintain honor while facing pervasive, grinding poverty. For a samurai's wife, every day was a testament to her quiet, brutal endurance against a system that demanded appearances and offered little financial stability. The academic debate about the precise reasons for the widespread economic precarity among the samurai class during certain periods often grapples with whether it was primarily due to flaws in the feudal economic system itself or due to changing social and political dynamics. Some historians argue that the inherent inflexibility of the rice stipend system, the absence of a dynamic market economy for samurai, and the increasing burden of social obligations during long periods of peace inevitably led to widespread debt and poverty within the samurai class, suggesting that the precarity was a systemic flaw of feudalism rather than an anomaly. They contend that the misery was an economic inevitability. Conversely, other scholars emphasize that while systemic issues contributed, the rapid urbanization, the emergence of a powerful merchant class, and the shifting political landscape where military prowess became less important than administrative skill eroded the traditional economic foundations of the samurai, arguing that their economic woes were a result of their inability to adapt to a changing world, rather than solely a flaw in the system itself. Highlighting that the brutal nature of their economic struggles was also a reflection of their resistance to change. They suggest that the poverty was also a consequence of social rigidity. It's a debate that makes you ponder the immense privilege of economic mobility and how much of our modern financial security relies on the quiet certainty that your livelihood is not entirely dependent on the whims of a powerful patron or the unpredictable bounty of a single harvest. As the quiet hum of rustling rice bags and the faint echoes of desperate budgeting from our journey slowly fade, and the gentle rhythm of your room returns, you are left with a stark understanding of why economic precarity was often a truly agonizing and miserable experience for a samurai's wife. These weren't just financial worries, they were fundamental challenges that brought real pain, profound anxiety, and constant reminders of human fragility in a world defined by unpredictable incomes and crushing social obligations. Their very existence, however honorable, was always shadowed by the very real possibility of debt, destitution, or utter ruin. Take a moment to appreciate the comforting, invisible shield of diversified economies, regulated markets, and financial safety nets, a reassurance that was a distant, dangerous dream for those who braved the awful side of ancient feudal life. As the quiet hum of rustling rice bags and the faint echoes of desperate budgeting from our last chapter mercifully fade, allowing the gentle rhythm of your room to truly settle, we now explore one of the most insidious and pervasive sources of suffering for a samurai's wife: isolation and separation. Forget your video calls, your constant communication, and the ease of travel that keeps you connected to loved ones. For these women, their lives were often defined by profound loneliness, extended periods of solitude, and agonizing separations from family and friends, turning their days into a quiet battle against emotional emptiness, with their emotional needs often secondary to the demands of duty and honor. Imagine yourself as a young samurai wife, perhaps married into a distant, unfamiliar province in the early 18th century, far from your birth family and childhood friends. Your husband, a samurai, is frequently away on duty attending his lord's court in Edo, managing his family's distant lands, or engaging in military training exercises. months, even years, can pass without his presence. You are left alone in a household that might be grand, but feels empty, surrounded by servants who are loyal but not companions, and separated from the comforting familiarity of your old life. Communication is slow and unreliable. A handwritten letter might take weeks or months to arrive, or never reach you at all. You might occasionally feel lonely when friends are busy or family is far away, but at least your biggest worry isn't whether your entire adult life will be spent in profound, often forced solitude, yearning for connections that are almost impossible to maintain. The most disturbing fact about this isolation was its multifaceted nature and the profound emotional toll it took. It wasn't just the physical separation from loved ones, though that was certainly painful. It was also the social isolation within her new household, where strict hierarchies and formal decorum often prevented the formation of deep, genuine friendships. New wives were often viewed with suspicion by their in-laws, and while they had duties to manage servants, these relationships were rarely intimate. Imagine living in a grand house, surrounded by people, yet feeling utterly alone, unable to truly connect with anyone, and always having to maintain a facade of polite detachment. It's like being trapped in a luxurious cage, where the bars are made of social etiquette and the silence is deafening. The husband's frequent and prolonged absences were a primary source of separation. A samurai's duty to his lord often meant long periods away from home, sometimes for years at a time. This could be for Sanken Kotai alternate attendance at the shogun's court in Edo, military campaigns, administrative duties in distant provinces, or simply extensive training. During these absences, the wife was left to manage the household alone, raise the children, and carry all the burdens of the family's daily life and honor without the companionship or emotional support of her husband. Imagine your partner being gone for months on end, with no phone calls, no video chats, and only the occasional, delayed letter to bridge the vast distance, leaving you to shoulder every single burden of family life alone. A common historical fact. The system of Sanken Kotai alternate attendance, enforced by the Tokugawa shogunate during the Edo period, required daimyo feudal lords to spend alternate years in Edo, modern Tokyo, and their home provinces, leaving their wives and eldest sons as permanent residents, effectively hostages in Edo. This meant that the wives of daimyo were often permanently separated from their home territories, and even the wives of lower-ranking samurai might experience long separations from their husbands who accompanied their lords. This policy, designed to centralize power and financially burden the lords, also created immense personal and familial isolation for samurai wives, forcing them into a life away from their ancestral lands and often their husbands. Imagine a powerful government policy specifically designed to separate families as a means of control. One particularly grim, lesser-known detail about isolation and separation involves the profound emotional burden of maintaining family connections through incredibly slow, unreliable, and often censored correspondence. While letters were exchanged, they were not the easy, frequent communications we know today. They could take weeks or months to reach their destination, be lost to bandits or natural disasters, or even be opened and read by suspicious authorities, limiting what could truly be expressed. This meant that emotional intimacy and detailed updates were almost impossible to sustain over long distances, leaving both parties to fill in vast emotional blanks, often with anxiety or longing. Imagine waiting months for a letter from your husband, filled with unspoken fears about his safety, knowing that by the time you receive it, the news, good or bad, is already weeks old, and that your deepest worries cannot even be shared for fear of censorship. This turned communication into a source of frustration and emotional suppression. It's like trying to have a meaningful conversation through a broken walkie-talkie, where every word is delayed and half of them are missing. The loss of close female friendships from their birth families further contributed to a samurai wife's isolation. Upon marriage, she essentially became a member of her husband's family. And while she might eventually form bonds with her new sisters-in-law or female retainers, these were often formal and cautious, especially initially. The deep, confiding friendships forged in childhood or adolescence were often severed by geographical distance and the strictures of her new life, leaving a profound emotional void. Imagine leaving all your best friends behind, moving to a new town where everyone is a stranger, and knowing that society expects you to form no new deep connections, leaving you truly alone with your thoughts. Furthermore, the emotional cost of maintaining stoicism and isolation, remember Chapter 4's emotional repression, was particularly heavy. Without the outlet of close companions or a consistently present husband, the samurai wife was often forced to bear her emotional burdens in complete solitude. Her training in emotional discipline meant that even in private, she might struggle to acknowledge or process her own pain, leading to a deep internal loneliness that was rarely expressed or alleviated. Imagine living in emotional solitary confinement, with no one to share your joys or sorrows, forcing you to become your own silent confessor and comforter. The psychological toll of such pervasive isolation was immense. It fostered a deep sense of yearning, a pervasive feeling of emptiness, and a profound emotional resilience born of necessity. Personal connection was a precious, often unattainable commodity. This wasn't just about being alone, it was the quiet, gnawing pain of a life lived without consistent intimacy. A constant battle against a world that prioritized duty over companionship. Their desperate coping mechanisms included cultivating inner resources, developing strong internal emotional resilience, self-reliance, and a rich inner life through reading, writing, and contemplation. Finding solace in domesticity, pouring emotional energy into meticulous household management, child rearing, and the cultivation of domestic harmony. Finding purpose in their immediate surroundings, symbolic connections, maintaining emotional ties to distant loved ones through symbolic gestures, prayers, and the careful preservation of cherished objects or letters, spiritual practice, deepening their engagement with Buddhism or Shinto, seeking solace, meaning, and connection in spiritual pursuits that transcended earthly separations, forming limited, trusted bonds, very cautiously forming bonds with a select few female retainers or trusted elder women within the household, if circumstances allowed for occasional, discreet emotional support. The misery wasn't just the physical distance, it was the constant, insidious emotional emptiness and the profound internal struggle to find connection and meaning within a life defined by pervasive loneliness. For a samurai's wife, every day was a testament to her quiet, brutal endurance against a system that demanded emotional self-sufficiency and offered little consistent companionship. The academic debate about the effects of sunken kotai and other long-term separations on samurai family structures and emotional well-being often grapples with whether these policies primarily eroded familial bonds and led to widespread personal suffering, or if they inadvertently fostered a unique form of female independence and resilience within the household. Some historians argue that the prolonged absences of husbands and the forced isolation of wives inevitably led to emotional strain, marital distance, and profound loneliness, suggesting that these separations were a detrimental force that weakened family cohesion and imposed immense personal misery, particularly on women who bore the brunt of maintaining the household alone. They contend that the isolation was overwhelmingly negative. Conversely, other scholars emphasize that precisely because of these absences, samurai wives were often forced to become incredibly self-reliant, skilled managers of their households, and authoritative figures in their children's upbringing, suggesting that while challenging, these conditions inadvertently empowered women within their domestic sphere, fostering a unique form of independence and a powerful, albeit quiet, authority that would not have been possible had their husbands been consistently present. They suggest that the isolation also forged strength. It's a debate that makes you ponder the profound impact of physical distance on human relationships, and how much of our modern sense of connection relies on the quiet certainty that your loved ones are just a text message or a short drive away. As the quiet hum of lonely silences and the faint echoes of yearning hearts from our journey slowly fade, and the gentle rhythm of your room returns, you are left with a stark understanding of why isolation and separation were often a truly agonizing and miserable experience for a samurai's wife. These weren't just logistical inconveniences. They were fundamental challenges that brought real pain, profound emptiness, and constant reminders of human fragility in a world that prioritized duty over companionship. Their very existence, however stoic, was always shadowed by the very real possibility of deep loneliness, emotional neglect, or utter personal despair. Take a moment to appreciate the comforting, invisible shield of instant communication, easy travel, and the freedom to maintain close bonds, a reassurance that was a distant, dangerous dream for those who braved the awful side of ancient feudal life. As the quiet hum of lonely silences and the faint echoes of yearning hearts from our last chapter mercifully fade, allowing the gentle rhythm of your room to truly settle, we now investigate a seemingly contradictory, yet deeply poignant, aspect of a samurai wife's life: education for endurance. Forget your notions of education for personal enrichment, career advancement, or intellectual exploration. For these women, their learning was meticulously crafted not to foster individual ambition, but to harden their spirit, instill unwavering discipline, and prepare them for a life of profound hardship, sacrifice, and the quiet, brutal endurance demanded by their role, turning every lesson into a preparation for a life of quiet suffering. Imagine yourself as a young girl, a daughter of a samurai family in feudal Japan, perhaps in the 17th century, attending lessons in your family compound. Your education isn't about choosing a major or pursuing a passion. Instead, you spend hours practicing calligraphy until your wrist aches, mastering the intricate steps of the tea ceremony until every movement is flawless, studying classical literature that emphasizes stoicism and duty, and learning household management with meticulous precision. You are also taught basic self-defense, not for offensive warfare, but to protect your honor in dire circumstances. Every lesson, every skill, is designed to mold you into a pillar of strength and a symbol of unwavering composure, preparing you for a future where your personal feelings will often be irrelevant and your ability to endure will be paramount. You might learn to manage a budget or handle a difficult conversation at work, but at least your biggest worry isn't whether your entire educational upbringing is designed solely to prepare you for a lifetime of quiet misery and self-sacrifice. The most disturbing fact about this education for endurance was its deliberate design to cultivate emotional stoicism and physical resilience at the expense of personal fulfillment. Girls of the samurai class were rigorously trained from a young age to suppress outward displays of emotion, particularly fear, pain, or grief. Remember Chapter 4's emotional repression. They were taught to endure discomfort, hardship, and loss with unwavering composure, believing that any sign of weakness would bring dishonor upon their family. This training was not just academic, it was deeply psychological, shaping their very perception of self and their role in the world. Imagine being taught from childhood that your personal pain is a weakness, your individual desires are irrelevant, and your ultimate purpose is to silently bear burdens, all for the sake of an abstract concept like honor. It's like attending a finishing school, but the curriculum is specifically designed to strip away your individual self and replace it with an unyielding, unbreakable shell. Mastery of traditional arts and household skills was not just for decorum, it was a form of mental and physical discipline. Practicing calligraphy required immense concentration and patience. Tea ceremony demanded precise movements and meticulous attention to detail, and household management, as we saw in Chapter 2. Unrelenting domestic duty required a sharp mind and an organized spirit. These activities, while beautiful, were also tools for self-control, teaching women to find order and purpose even in chaos, and to channel their inner turmoil into highly disciplined, outwardly serene actions. Imagine spending hours perfecting a single brushstroke, not because you love art, but because of the discipline it teaches helps you endure the emotional weight of your daily life. A common historical fact. Many samurai daughters were taught basic martial arts, such as handling a naginata, a polearm with a curved blade, or a kaiken, a small dagger. This training was not intended for them to fight on battlefields alongside men, but primarily for self-defense in the home during sieges, or, more importantly, for the honorable act of jigai female ritual suicide to preserve their honor if faced with capture or extreme dishonor. This grim aspect of their martial education underscores the profound extent to which their entire upbringing was a preparation for ultimate sacrifice, prioritizing honor even over life. Imagine learning how to defend yourself, not to live, but to choose the precise moment of your own honorable death. One particularly grim, lesser-known detail about education for endurance involves the subtle, yet pervasive teaching of a form of preparedness for widowhood, or preparation for loss from a young age. Given the constant warfare and the dangerous nature of samurai life, young girls were implicitly and explicitly taught to mentally prepare for the inevitable possibility of their husband's death in battle, or their own children's deaths from illness or conflict. This wasn't morbid, it was pragmatic. Their emotional training aimed to equip them to manage grief with composure, maintain the household, and ensure the family's continuity even in the face of profound personal tragedy. Imagine being taught from adolescence that you must harden your heart for the inevitable, that grieving openly is a luxury you cannot afford, and that your duty will always transcend your personal sorrow, forcing you to develop a grim, preemptive emotional armor. It's like training for a marathon, but the finish line is a lifetime of quiet bereavement, and the prize is merely survival. The emphasis on duty over individual happiness was paramount in their education. From the stories they heard to the texts they read, every lesson reinforced the idea that personal desires were secondary to the family's honor, the husband's duty, and the clan's prosperity. This meant that their education implicitly, and often explicitly, discouraged the pursuit of personal ambition or individual dreams, channeling their intellect and energy solely towards supporting their assigned roles. Imagine growing up with every lesson reinforcing the message that your personal joy is unimportant, and that your greatest virtue lies in self-abnegation and unwavering service to others, even if it means sacrificing your own hopes and dreams. Furthermore, the limited scope of their formal education meant that while they might be highly literate and skilled in certain arts, their learning was often narrowly focused on what was deemed appropriate for their role. They were not typically educated in politics, military strategy, or broad philosophical discourse in the same way as men, further reinforcing their separation from the public sphere and channeling their intellectual capabilities into their domestic and honorable functions. Imagine being highly intelligent and capable of complex thought, but your education restricts your knowledge to what is deemed proper for your gender and role, limiting your understanding of the wider world and confining your intellectual aspirations to a narrow, prescribed path. The psychological toll of an education so singularly focused on endurance was immense. It fostered a deep sense of resignation, a pervasive feeling of being shaped for a predetermined, often arduous, path, and a profound suppression of spontaneous self-expression. Their education created a formidable inner strength, but often at the cost of genuine personal freedom and emotional vulnerability. This wasn't just about learning skills, it was the quiet, gnawing pain of being molded into an instrument of duty. A constant battle against the natural human desire for individual growth and diverse aspirations. Their desperate coping mechanisms included internalized resilience, absorbing the lessons of stoicism and self-discipline to develop an almost unbreakable inner core that could withstand immense pressure and loss. Mastery as solace, finding a profound sense of accomplishment and quiet personal satisfaction in the flawless execution of their duties and the mastery of their assigned arts. Finding purpose in service, deriving meaning and dignity from their indispensable role in supporting their family's honor, and ensuring the continuation of their lineage. Quiet contemplation, using the disciplined practice of tea ceremony, calligraphy, or gardening as meditative outlets for their suppressed emotions. Finding a form of spiritual release, legacy as motivation, focusing on the future of their children and the honor of their descendants as a driving force. Transcending their own personal suffering, The misery wasn't just the rigorous lessons, it was the constant, insidious shaping of their very being into an instrument of resilience, and the profound internal struggle to find personal meaning within an existence so completely dedicated to quiet endurance and sacrifice. For a samurai's wife, every aspect of her education was a testament to her quiet, brutal preparation for a life that demanded everything and offered little room for her own dreams. The academic debate about the value and impact of this specialized education for samurai women often grapples with whether it was primarily a tool of patriarchal oppression that limited their potential, or whether it genuinely empowered them with unique forms of strength and agency within their social context. Some historians argue that while the education instilled valuable skills, its ultimate purpose was to reinforce gender inequality and prepare women for a life of subservience and self-sacrifice, limiting their intellectual horizons and stifling their personal development, suggesting that their endurance was a byproduct of their enforced subjugation, not a true form of empowerment. They contend that the misery was systemic. Conversely, other scholars emphasize that within the confines of their societal roles, this education equipped samurai wives with formidable mental fortitude, practical skills, and an unparalleled capacity for resilience, allowing them to navigate extreme adversity, manage complex households, and serve as indispensable pillars of their families, making them figures of quiet, formidable strength and influence within their own sphere, even if it wasn't recognized publicly. They suggest that the education indeed fostered genuine, albeit understated, power. It's a debate that makes you ponder the true nature of empowerment, and how much of our modern freedom relies on the quiet certainty that your education is a pathway to personal growth, not just a preparation for hardship, as the quiet hum of disciplined strokes and the faint echoes of unspoken aspirations from our journey slowly fade, and the gentle rhythm of your room returns. You are left with a stark understanding of why education for endurance was often a truly agonizing and miserable experience for a samurai's wife. These weren't just lessons, they were fundamental challenges that brought real pain, profound self-denial, and constant reminders of human fragility in a world that demanded unwavering resilience. Their very existence, however refined, was always shadowed by the very real possibility of a life of quiet suffering, unfulfilled dreams, or utter personal sacrifice. Take a moment to appreciate the comforting, invisible shield of comprehensive education, personal ambition, and the freedom to pursue your own intellectual curiosity, a reassurance that was a distant, dangerous dream for those who braved the awful side of ancient feudal life. As the quiet hum of disciplined strokes and the faint echoes of unspoken aspirations from our last chapter mercifully fade, allowing the gentle rhythm of your room to truly settle. Our deep dive into what sucked about being a samurai's wife and more reaches its peaceful yet resonant conclusion. This final chapter brings us to modern echoes and lessons, a reflection on how these historical struggles, though centuries removed from our meticulously regulated and technologically advanced societies, continue to resonate, often subtly, within our contemporary lives, offering profound insights into the enduring human experience of resilience, duty, and quiet strength. Imagine, if you will, looking around your own room right now. You're likely surrounded by an array of choices and freedoms that samurai wives could only dream of: the ability to choose your career, your partner, your home, and express your thoughts freely. Yet, despite all our advancements, a deep, ancient part of the human experience still grapples with challenges that are strikingly similar to those that made our ancestors' lives so difficult. You might scroll through a newsfeed on your phone, perhaps seeing a report about modern gender inequalities, the pressure to maintain a perfect public image, or the quiet struggles of caregiving. That, my friend, is the echo. First, let's consider the enduring pressure to balance personal desires with societal expectations. While we no longer face feudal lords arranging marriages, remember Chapter 6's Arranged Marriages and Alliances. Many individuals, particularly women, still grapple with the tension between pursuing their own ambitions and fulfilling traditional roles as caregivers, homemakers, or perceived ideal partners. The subtle yet pervasive societal scripts about what a good partner, mother, or professional should be can still lead to immense internal conflict and the quiet suppression of personal dreams. We've replaced rigid class structures with cultural norms, but the underlying struggle to define one's own path amidst external pressures is remarkably similar, just on a different scale. Imagine feeling the weight of 1,000 unspoken expectations about your life choices, knowing that deviation might bring subtle social disapproval or internal guilt. It's like discovering that your ultra-modern freedom still comes with an invisible, ancient chains. The most disturbing echo of past emotional brutalism is the persistent expectation of emotional resilience and the suppression of vulnerability. While therapy and open communication are more common, many cultures and even certain professional environments still subtly or overtly discourage the full expression of negative emotions like grief, fear, or anger, especially for women. The pressure to be strong, handle it, or not burden others can lead to internalized pain. Mental health struggles and a pervasive sense of isolation recall Chapter 4's emotional repression. We've replaced samurai codes with corporate composure and social media facades, but the underlying struggle to show our true emotional selves without judgment is remarkably similar, just operating in a different arena. Imagine needing to project an image of perfect composure at work, even when your personal life is in turmoil. Knowing that showing vulnerability might be seen as a weakness. It's like having a perfectly curated online profile neat, but the real you is screaming inside. A common historical fact. The concept of saving face, maintaining dignity, and avoiding public embarrassment is a widespread cultural phenomenon, not just in East Asia, but globally. This modern social dynamic, which often involves suppressing personal feelings or discomfort to maintain appearances, directly echoes the extreme emphasis on honor, decorum, and the suppression of emotion that defined samurai society. The pressure to present a flawless public persona, even when internally struggling, connects our modern anxieties about reputation and perception with the ancient strictures that dictated a samurai wife's every move. Imagine the constant effort to present a perfect version of yourself to the world, knowing that any slip could be judged, much like an ancient noblewoman's every move. One particularly grim, lesser-known echo from the past involves the unseen burden of invisible labor and the disproportionate emotional and administrative load often borne by women in modern households and families. Just as samurai wives were the unacknowledged chief operating officers of their homes, meticulously managing budgets, servants, and the daily grind without public recognition. Remember Chapter 2's unrelenting domestic duty. Many modern women still shoulder the vast majority of household management, emotional labor, and caregiving responsibilities, often alongside full-time careers. This invisible work, from planning family schedules to remembering birthdays to coordinating childcare, is often unpaid, uncelebrated, and profoundly exhausting, mirroring the ceaseless, thankless toil of their ancestors. Imagine constantly juggling a dozen invisible tasks in your mind, managing everyone else's needs and schedules, without anyone truly acknowledging the sheer mental effort it takes. Feeling perpetually overwhelmed by responsibilities that never truly end. It's like running a silent, endless marathon where the finish line keeps moving. The vulnerability to economic shocks and the precariousness of modern livelihoods is another powerful echo. While we have more sophisticated financial systems, many individuals and families still live paycheck to paycheck, one medical emergency or unexpected job loss away from financial hardship. The gig economy, rising living costs, and global economic fluctuations can create a persistent anxiety about financial security. Echoing the economic precarity, Chapter 7. Our ancestors faced with their fluctuating rice stipends and unpredictable lordly demands. We've replaced arbitrary feudal taxes with complex market forces, but the underlying fear of destitution and the struggle to maintain stability is remarkably similar, just operating on a different technological and global scale. It's like trying to build a stable life on shifting sands, always aware that a sudden economic downturn could pull the rug out from under you. Consider also the ongoing struggles for personal safety and the pervasive threat of violence, both domestic and societal, which persist to this day. While the fear of invading armies might be rare for many, the threat of domestic violence, violent crime, or the psychological warfare of unstable relationships, recall the echoes of Chapter 1's Life of Constant Fear, remains a grim reality for countless individuals globally. The need for vigilance, the struggle for agency, and the profound impact of living in an unsafe environment connect our modern struggles with the constant dread that defined a samurai wife's existence. The misery isn't just the memory of past hardships, it's the realization that some aspects of our human vulnerability and struggle for agency are timeless. Despite our comfort, we are still navigating complex social pressures, economic uncertainties, and emotional landscapes that require immense resilience. Our choices are freer, our opportunities vastly greater, but the underlying human condition, the desire for belonging, the fear of loss, the struggle for authenticity remains constant. This humility, this deep-seated understanding that human progress, however profound, still carries echoes of its brutal past, is perhaps the most profound lesson learned from our ancestors' struggles. Their contemporary coping mechanisms are far more sophisticated but still rooted in the same human impulses, advocacy and activism. Fighting for social justice, gender equality, and labor rights to address systemic inequalities and protect vulnerable populations. Mental health awareness and support promoting therapy, mindfulness, and open dialogue to combat emotional repression, and provide tools for psychological well-being. Financial literacy and planning, empowering individuals with knowledge and tools to manage their finances, diversify income, and build personal safety nets. Community building and support networks actively seeking out and creating supportive communities, both online and offline, to combat isolation and foster genuine connection. Purpose-driven living seeking, meaning and fulfillment not just in external achievements, but in personal values, creative expression, and contributing to a better world. Embracing a sense of agency that was denied to many ancestors, the misery isn't just the occasional scandal, it's the constant, systemic challenge of balancing individual freedom with societal expectations, and the profound internal struggle to live authentically in a world that still demands conformity and often undervalues the unseen labor of resilience. For those navigating the complexities of modern life, every choice, every relationship, every aspiration carries the weight of echoes from the past, turning contemporary existence into a testament to ongoing human struggles and the relentless pursuit of a more equitable and fulfilling life. The academic debate about whether modern society has truly overcome the brutal economics of the past or simply transmuted them into new forms often grapples with the paradox of increased global wealth alongside persistent inequalities. Some scholars argue that despite the clear benefits of modern progress, many of the fundamental suck factors of the past, particularly those related to gender roles, economic insecurity, and emotional burdens, have merely evolved, continuing to impact marginalized groups and perpetuating silent suffering in new, often less visible ways, suggesting that while overt brutality has lessened, systemic pressures and vulnerabilities remain deeply embedded in our societal structures, creating a continued, albeit more subtle form of brutal economics. They contend that the echoes are more profound than we care to admit. Conversely, other scholars emphasize the transformative power of human rights, technological innovation, and evolving social norms, arguing that despite ongoing challenges, modern societies offer unprecedented opportunities for personal freedom, self-expression, and the alleviation of suffering, allowing individuals to escape many of the suck factors that defined ancient lives, making our era distinctively more equitable and compassionate than any historical period. They suggest that the lessons truly mark a departure from the brutal. It's a debate that makes you ponder the true legacy of human progress, and whether we have truly escaped the brutal economics of the past, or merely shifted its burden and made its consequences more complex. As the quiet hum of your modern world and the distant echoes of humanity's long struggle with hidden burdens and quiet strengths finally embrace you, you are left with a profound understanding. The brutal economics of the past weren't just historical curiosities. They were fundamental forces that shaped every aspect of human life, pushing our ancestors to the brink, forging their resilience and leaving a legacy that still whispers in our contemporary anxieties. But tonight, there are no feudal lords dictating your marriage, no invisible pressures forcing you into a life of emotional silence, no arbitrary financial ruin looming over your home. The harsh realities of the past are now illuminated by understanding and confined to the fascinating, yet sometimes grim, realm of history. So, let the echoes of these historical miseries fade now. Let the discomfort of past pain and the anxieties of forgotten perils dissolve into the quiet hum of your night. Your body grows heavy, your mind serene. Just rest now, and let the quietness of your peaceful space guide you into a deep, restorative sleep.